Hello, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining in for today's webinar presentation. Today, we are taking a look at transaction codes in RoomKeyPMS. We'll go ahead and get started here with a bit of an outline of today's presentation. We'll start with some introductions. We'll talk about what are transaction codes and give a couple definitions as it pertains to RoomKey. Then we'll dive right into some demonstration. We'll look at how to create and manage GL accounts or general ledger accounts, how to manage taxes, and how to manage transaction codes. We'll also talk about when you can start using these tools and functions inside RoomKey, and then we'll wrap up today's presentation with a summary and Q&A at the end. So to introduce myself, I am Tasha Leclerc. I'm a trainer and implementation specialist with RoomKey. Joining me today, I do have our Director of Customer Experience, Mr. William Tam. I'll be leading today's presentation and the demonstration on screen, and William will oversee the chat and Q&A section in Zoom. So if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and use the Q&A button in the Zoom presentation. You can ask a question and Will can answer any of those. If there's any questions that are remaining, we can address those during the Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. A couple more things about today's presentation. You may have heard the notification at the top there, letting you know that this webinar is being recorded. A copy of the recording will be made available on our public support website, and those of you registered for the presentation will receive notification once that recording is available on our support website. For those of you that are joining our live presentation this morning, you will receive a webinar survey at the end of our presentation. Just a couple of quick questions just to gauge how we're doing with these presentations. And if you do have any suggestions for topics for the future presentations throughout 2023, please let us know. We appreciate any feedback you're able to offer us through those surveys as well. Speaking of future presentations, I'm happy to advise or announce that our topic for next month is going to be corporate accounts. So stay tuned in the coming weeks for an update about when you can register for next month's webinar presentation on corporate accounts. That will also include OTAs or online travel agents like Expedia and Booking.com Quick Connects. Wonderful. So let's dive right into our topic and define what are transaction codes. So in RoomKey, for transaction codes, we use a fairly simple accounting definition. They are customizable codes that are used to track debits and credits. So that's the revenue flow throughout the RoomKey software there. Now I'm going to break this definition down into two parts. We'll look at the codes part first, that customizable codes part. In RoomKey, there are 5 types of transaction codes that are available inside the system. The first transaction code type is room charges. These are any nightly or weekly or monthly room charges that you charge for accommodation at your property. Any codes that are created as part of room charges directly affect the ADR and RevPAR calculations on our statistical reports throughout the RoomKey software. The next type of code that we have are taxes. These are typically built as a percentage or dollar value and attached to either a room charge code or they could be attached to other charge code. Now, other charges are kind of a catch-all. These are the bulk of the transaction codes that'll be built in your system, and they are the most customizable. They can be used to create cancellation fees, phone, fax, or printing services. These could be your parking charges, anything related to food and beverage, or maybe POS charges. These could also be used to charge for any amenities or merchandise that you may sell from the front desk as well. So the bulk of your transaction codes, like I said, will be other charges, and those taxes can also be applied to other charges in this case as well. Now, another type of transaction code that is available inside RoomKey are payment codes. These are the most common ones, of course, are credit card transaction codes. So those would be Visa, MasterCard, American Express, or any type of credit card that you would accept at your property. They could also be other forms of payment like cash or check or electronic funds transfer. Or if you accept Apple Pay, anything that you would accept for payment, those would be considered or built as payment codes inside your database. The last type of transaction code are called special codes. Sometimes these are also referred to as system codes. These are the least customizable. They are built by the system. They are not used to charge for items for the guest. They are actually used to transfer charges or revenue from between general ledger accounts. So a good example of a special code that you may see on a report is a deposit transfer. So if your property takes a deposit before the guest arrives, that is held in an account called deposit holdings. And when the guest checks in, that deposit is actually transferred from the deposit holdings account to the guest ledger account automatically at the time of check-in. So the front desk team or the users in RoomKey do not use the special codes. Those are codes that are used by the RoomKeyPMS software itself. So with all these different codes inside RoomKey, these are all considered transaction codes. And for each transaction code in the RoomKey system, we do have a GL or general ledger account attached to each and every one of those. The general ledger account is what is used to track the debits and credits. We have specific reporting dedicated to the GL account or general ledger called the journal entry report. Now, the most common way that we create the transaction codes is to attach one transaction code to one GL account in this fashion here. But RoomKey does give you the flexibility if you wanted to attach multiple transaction codes to the same GL account. The system can also accommodate that structure as well. So a good example of this contrast, a one-to-one setup might be a room charge transaction code is attached to the room revenue general ledger account in a one-to-one ratio. But another example here might be food and beverage charges. You might have a transaction code for a breakfast meal, but you might also have another transaction code for wine or beverages sold at the sold from the front desk. Those could be multiple different types of transaction codes, but they could all go to the same general ledger account for food and beverage revenue. So a couple different ways that we can kind of customize this and track this revenue as it pertains to transaction codes that are used by front desk or staff using the system, and how that is tracked on the back end using those general ledger accounts. So because the general ledger accounts are the tool that is used to track debits and credits, we actually begin to build out those general ledger accounts first. So let's take a look at how to create and manage general ledger accounts in RoomKey. Now I have a video here that'll show us how to create a general ledger account from the transaction codes module. So to create a general ledger account, you're going to start from the transaction codes module found in System Configuration. When the module opens up, you're going to click the GL Accounts tab and select the Add button on the right-hand side. You can now add the name of the general ledger account. If you are using an accounting software that uses numerical codes, you can enter the numerical code into the account identifier and simply click OK. Once you've created the general ledger account, you will now see it available in the list of available accounts. So it's a very quick process to create general ledger accounts or GL accounts inside RoomKey using that transaction codes module. Now, the reporting that we use to report on or track the debits and credits for those general ledger accounts is called the journal entry report. And I'm going to bring up a RoomKeyPMS database, just a test database on screen here, and I'll show you where you can find that journal entry report. In the reporting menu, within the financial section, it's simply called journal entry. Now, by default, this journal entry report will give you a date range that will default to month to date. So it shows me from beginning of this month to the current date. It also gives you a couple of options for how to display this information. I'm going to use the default option, Contract All. So when I select OK, this is just going to let me know that the report is going to generate. And the nice thing about this report is it'll let me know the last time that this report was reviewed. Typically, this report is reviewed on a daily basis, so this will typically show you the yesterday or previous date. So once this report opens up, it will appear full screen to give me a preview here. And this report is going to show me a list of all of my general ledger accounts listed along the left-hand side. There's that new account that we just created for tax revenue for HST or harmonized sales tax. And then each column will show me any of the debits and credits within the date range that was selected, so month to date so far. It'll show me the net amount, and then of course at the end it'll give me a month to date total as well. The nice thing that I like with this report as well is at the bottom here we also have pulled out the receivable accounts. These are 3 special accounts that are used to track revenue in the hotel throughout the guest life cycle. So any revenue that is collected before the guest arrives will appear in a deposit holdings account. Any revenue that is collected while the guest is in-house appears in the AR guest ledger. And any revenue that is due to be collected after the guest checks out, so these might be your direct bills, would be accrued inside the city ledger. Now, these are the 3 receivable accounts, and like I said, they are summarized here based off of the balance in as of my date range and the balance out as of the current date. Now, if you're using current dates on this report, you may notice that these receivable accounts have the letter E beside it, and that's because these numbers are not yet settled. This is just an estimate, so these balance out values at the bottom are subject to change depending on what charges and guests are checking in and out and things like that throughout the rest of today. So just a little reminder about those codes at the bottom there. So these 3 codes, city ledger, guest ledger, and deposit holdings, these are customizable in that your property may have changed the names. So deposit holdings, for example, may just be called advanced deposit in your database. So just be mindful that there may be a slight difference in the naming for your property to suit your property's business there. Thanks. So this, like I said, the journal entry will outline all of the debits and credits for each of these accounts. Again, this was the contract all version of this report. I'm going to close this report and show you the other variation that will show more detailed information. So once again, from reports, financial, journal entry, this time I'm going to select the expand all option and click OK. Now with the expand all option selected, it's going to show me the same report for the same date range. This time for each account within the description column, it's going to break out all of the different transaction codes that are associated with that account and what their corresponding debits and credits may be. So at the bottom here, I still have my same total, the same totals that we saw on the summary report. And then if I scroll down a little bit further here, to the second page, you do still have that summary of your receivable accounts for your AR City, AR Guest, and deposit holdings. So a couple more features of this report. You do have the ability to print the report directly using the print icon at the top of the screen, or you can export this in CSV file format and export that or import that into an accounting software. A reminder from where we saw how to create the account, if you are using accounting software, you can use a numerical code instead of an account number, instead of an account name, you can use a numerical code that would correspond with your accounting software. Okay. So just heading back to our presentation here, that's an overview of how to create and review those general ledger accounts in RoomKey using the transaction codes module. The next thing that I want to take a look at is how to create and manage taxes in the transaction codes module. So I do have a short video here, 1 minute, that will show us how to create a tax from scratch inside RoomKey. In the previous demonstration video, I did show you how to create a general ledger account, and the account that we created was for tax revenue, HST, or harmonized sales tax. So this next video is going to show us how to actually create the tax itself, and it will also show you how to attach that general ledger account to the tax code at the same time. Thanks. So to create a tax, we're going to start from the transaction codes module found in system configuration. When the module opens up, you're going to click the taxes tab, and on the right-hand side, you're going to click the add button. Here in general information, you can add a description or a name for the tax. This example is HST, or harmonized sales tax, and you can also enter in the rate, which is 12%. You'll click Post on the right-hand side, and RoomKey will remind you that you need to attach a general ledger account. So you'll click the Insert button on the right-hand side, and here in the Credit field, you can select the general ledger account. In this case, we'll use the Tax Revenue HST account, which will automatically populate, and I can select OK. Now that the account is attached, the tax is ready to apply to a transaction code. Thanks. So that short video showed us that process from beginning to end on how to create a tax, and that tax rate was set at 12%. Now, when you start with RoomKey, part of our onboarding services is to build all of your taxes and transaction codes ahead of time, anything that you're bringing forward from your existing system. But it is possible that in the future, your tax rates may fluctuate. Tax rates can be changed inside RoomKey using the same module. This next video I have here will show us how to change a tax rate, but please be mindful that you do need to do this at least 24 hours before it will take effect. So you need to do this 24 hours in advance. And typically when a tax rate is being changed, if you have a notification from your province or state letting you know that the tax rates are being changed, they'll typically let you know 3 to 6 months in advance, I hope, so that you have forewarning. You can actually program this tax change to occur at a future date. So this quick video is going to show us how to change the tax rate. We'll change the tax that we just created in the previous video. We're going to change the tax rate from 12% to 13%, and we're going to schedule that to occur on February 1st. So to change the tax rate, again, you'll start from the transaction codes module found in system configuration. You'll select the Taxes tab, and you'll locate the tax that you want to change, and then click the Tax Rates tab. Here you can insert a line item and where you can designate the new tax rate. This will now change to 13%. And we're going to designate the date that that change will occur. So February 1st, and select the Post button. That change is now recorded. So as of February 1st, the tax rate will increase to 13%. So that gives you an overview of some of the basic functions of the creating a tax and managing that tax rate if you ever needed to change that information in the future. Now that we've seen how we can create and manage GL accounts and taxes, let's jump into how to manage transaction codes. I'm going to show you a couple of demonstrations here, and we'll start with how to create a transaction code. I'm going to use our demo database for this demonstration. So this is the database that we've seen in the previous video. So I know that I have a HST tax that I can apply. That's a harmonized sales tax in this example. And I'm going to create a new transaction code to sell a bottle of wine from the front desk. So I begin by starting from the system configuration menu, select transaction codes. And when the transaction codes module opens up, by default, it does default to the codes tab. We've already seen how we can manage the taxes and GL accounts in previous videos. So here on the codes tab, it will also default to show you your room charge codes. Now, if you remember from earlier in this presentation, room charge codes are built specifically to accrue or track ADR and RevPAR statistics in our reporting in RoomKey. So it is mindful that this section is only for room charges. Of course, depending on how your business operates, you may have monthly or weekly room charges. You may also see a room charge option for no tax or tax exempt. Because I'm going to be building a wine or food and beverage charge in this case, I'm going to change the selected transaction code type over on the right-hand side. I'm going to change that to other charge. Other charge is where you will have most of your transaction codes. There's quite a lengthy list here, and you can use the scroll button to scroll through and view all of your different room charge or different charge codes available in your database. To create a new transaction code, I'll select the Add button on the right-hand side. And in the general information, I can now add the details of this transaction code. So this will be a transaction code for wine or a bottle of wine. I add a code and a description. Both the code and the description will appear on the guest folio when this transaction code is posted to a guest account. The code must be no more than 7 characters in length. So I've just added a short code here for wine. And the description will appear as the name of the transaction code there. So this is just being as descriptive as possible there. Now, this transaction code will only be posted when a guest purchases wine. Perhaps they might purchase it to be placed in the room for their arrival. But we can customize different types of codes using other charge here. So you could have different types of transaction codes that may follow a repeatable pattern off to the right-hand side. So we've got a lot of flexibility here with how you can repeat or apply these transaction codes. You can set up a transaction code to repeat daily, weekly, or monthly. And you can also set up a transaction code to apply to either a person in the room, so per person in the room, or simply apply it to the room itself. So that would be a single charge in that case. Some examples of these repeatable patterns is if you have a parking charge where you charge for parking nightly throughout the guest stay, that would be built as a repeatable transaction code that repeats daily applied to the room. Another example you might have is a breakfast charge where you might charge for breakfast for each guest throughout their stay. That again would be a repeatable pattern posted daily, but in that case it would be applicable per person. So per person in the room there. So lots of flexibility with the repeatable pattern and how you create this transaction code. Again, this is a non-repeatable transaction code, so I will simply select no, and the transaction code is being applied to the room. Now, you can also customize the sort order of where this transaction code appears in the drop-down menu when a user is posting this charge to an account or to a guest account. The sort order number will default to 255. I find many of our properties will use the default sort order because with that default sort order, this system will automatically sort this alphabetically. So in this case, wine would appear towards the bottom of this list of available charges. So now that I've created the code, the description, and I've reviewed the repeatable pattern, I can select OK on the right-hand side. And just like we saw with that tax transaction code, RoomKey does remind me that I need to attach a GL account before I make this code active. So I've created the code and it appears here in my list of transaction codes, but you'll notice that the transaction code is not active. I do need to attach that GL account first before I can activate the code itself. And I can attach the GL account on the Accounts tab. I'll select Insert on the right-hand side, and that will now allow me to insert a line item which predetermines the debits for these accounts. In order to attach a GL account, I want to tell the system which account to credit whenever this transaction code is used. So I click in the credit field, and from this drop-down menu, I can select my food and beverage transaction or food and beverage revenue account, or in this case, it's just called F&B revenue. When I select F&B revenue, it will automatically populate in the credit and CL credit fields. I can select OK. So what this now does is it lets me know how this transaction code is tracked on those general ledger accounts. When this transaction code is used to post a charge to a guest account when the guest is in-house, it will credit the food and beverage revenue account and it will debit from the guest ledger account. When this transaction code is used to charge for a bottle of wine that is part of the city ledger, so if I post this charge in the city ledger, it will still debit, or so it will still credit the food and beverage revenue account, but instead it will actually debit the city ledger account because that's a separate receivable account instead of the guest ledger account. So I know that that can be often a question that we get about those general ledger accounts here. That's just tracking that revenue depending on where or how that transaction code is being used. So now that I've attached the general ledger account, I can go back to the General tab, select Modify on the right-hand side, and place a check mark in the Active checkbox. That's now going to activate my transaction code, and I can see that transaction code, once again, listed in the list of transaction codes up above, and now it has an active checkbox next to it. So I've just created this brand new transaction code. Let me show you how this now appears for the users in RoomKey. I'll close the transaction code module, and I'm going to select one of our in-house guests and select Post Charges. This guest is now going to have a bottle of wine, which I can select from my code drop-down list. I can see the code is wine and the reference field, or that name descriptor, appears automatically. And I can enter in the amount for this wine. Say it's $50. Now what you'll notice is that the amount for this wine does not have any taxes associated with it, and the amount does not pre-populate. That is by default, but if you would like to apply taxes, or if you'd like to predetermine an amount for this transaction, we can set that up as part of the transaction code as well. So let's just cancel out of here. We'll go back to the transaction codes module. Go to Other Charges and select the wine charge. This should show up at the bottom here under Wine. So if you want to apply taxes to a transaction code, you would select the Taxes tab for that transaction code, and on the right-hand side, you'll see a list of available taxes built inside the system. Now, we did see the HST was created for us, so I'm going to apply that tax to the wine or bottle of wine transaction code. You can apply multiple taxes to the same transaction code by selecting them from the right-hand side and using the black arrow to move them over to the left-hand side. I'm only going to apply the one tax here, so I'm going to select Post. Now, if you also wanted to make a set amount for that item, so in this case, a bottle of wine will set as $50, you can use the Fixed Amount field. When you select Fixed Amount, you would click the Insert button on the right-hand side, and you can set what that fixed amount is. So $50 in this case. Now, you'll notice that this does have date from and date to values. So if the price of an item fluctuates seasonally, you can set up those seasonal fluctuations in advance by repeating that process. You would once again select Insert, and you can insert a new price for a future date. Just going to cancel that one, and we'll leave this set as $50. So now with those changes made, I've applied taxes and set a fixed amount. I'm now going to show you how that affects the transaction code when I use it to post to a guest account. When I select Post Charges this time, Once again, I'll select my wine or bottle of wine code. And now you can see that the taxes are automatically populating in the taxes field. So there I have $6 worth of tax that is applicable, which brings the total up to $56. I can now select OK, exit, and that will apply that charge for a bottle of wine to the guest folio. I can review that charge on the guest folio, and that will appear as a single line item with the description, the net amount of $50, the tax, and then the total amount, including taxes. So those are the transaction codes. The most common transaction codes that you would create are other charges. I'm going to open up the transaction code module once again and show you some of those other types of transaction codes. So once again, in the transaction codes module, on the right-hand side, we've talked about room charge and other charge. We also have payment codes. This is where you would set up any of your payment methods that you would accept from guests as a form of payment. Any codes that you set up here in the payment code section will be available to select when the guest or when the user selects post-payment. So the accounts are set up in much the same way. You would use the Add button to create a new payment method. You would enter in a code and description. Now, the difference with payment codes is that you will be able to enter in a subgroup or a transaction subgroup. So for most cases, if you are accepting a new form of credit card payment, you would select the credit card subgroup, or if you're accepting another form of cash payment or check, those are also options available from this drop-down menu. Got a couple different options here. Cash and check are also available as examples in this database. Now, the difference with payment codes is in the way that the accounts are attached. So here in the Accounts tab, instead of selecting the credit general ledger account, you'll actually be selecting the debit general ledger account. It operates in much the same way. When you select Insert on the right-hand side, it will insert a line item where you can then select the general ledger account in the debit column instead of credit. So when you use a payment code, instead of crediting the revenue account, it's actually going to debit the revenue account. In most databases, the common debit account for payment codes is a general ledger account called bank, but your database may have custom general ledger accounts for each payment type. So for example, you may have for your American Express credit cards, you may have a dedicated American Express general ledger account. So a couple of differences there with the other charge or room charges versus payment transaction codes here. The last type of transaction code we have in the system was those special codes, and these are considered system codes. Like I said, they are not customizable and they are not used by any users in RoomKey. They are simply used to transfer between the receivable general ledger accounts. So that example I used was the deposit transfer transaction code that is transferring charges or deposits from the deposit holdings account to the guest ledger when the guest checks in. You'll notice that we do not have the ability to add or modify or manage these codes because they are part of the purpose-built system codes there. So you would only see these system codes appear on transaction code reporting if you take advanced deposits. Speaking of reporting, now that we've seen how transaction codes are created and managed inside the transaction codes module, heading back to our presentation here, the next thing that I wanted to show you was transaction code reporting. So the most common report that you'll use to review your transaction codes is actually a report inside RoomKey here. It is found in the Reports menu. financial, and it appears right below that journal entry report. It is called the Transaction Register Balance Report. Now, there's a couple variations of this report. There's a detail and a summary. I'm going to show you the summary example here. And this is going to summarize all of the transactions recorded on today's date. So when I select OK, this will now generate the report for me. And I can see that new transaction code that I just created for the bottle of wine purchase. It'll show me that within the other charge section, and I can see the amount, the taxes, and the total amount for that charge. Now, the nice thing with this transaction register balance summary report is that it's going to show me not only other charges, it will also show me room charges. It'll show me any payments that have been recorded throughout the day or the date range selected, and it will also summarize my taxes at the bottom here. So we can see that HST tax that was created in the demonstration videos and applied to the bottle of wine. And I can see that amount is recorded here or summarized here in this report as well. From time to time, I do get a question about tax remittance. So if your property does any tax remittance processes, this is a great report to use for that purpose because you can select a wider date range. So this example just shows for a single date, but if you were doing any of your tax remittance for a wider date range, you can actually use this report as well. It will show you the remittance and summarize the taxes at the bottom here. So that's the most common report that you would use to report on just your transactions throughout the day. Another common report that you may want to access for business purposes, found in the reports menu, statistics, is the daily operating report. Now, this report can only be pulled for past dates, so this is going to show me yesterday's information. And the benefit of this report is that in addition to showing you the revenue information for today's date, so, for the selected date, in this case, yesterday's date, it'll show you the calculation for yesterday's date in the first column, but after you've been using RoomKey for 1 full year, this report will also show you the comparison to the same date last year. It will give you month-to-date calculation for that transaction, and it will also show you year-to-date calculations. So that report is the daily operating report found in the statistics menu. So a couple different ways that you can create and manage those transaction codes, as well as report on the usage of transaction codes within the RoomKeyPMS database. Heading back to our presentation here, next thing that we'll look at is when can you start using these tools in RoomKey? Well, they are part of every RoomKeyPMS database, so you can get started using these tools and functions right away. Now, the ability to access the transaction codes module and create or manage taxes and GL accounts, that is somewhat restricted based off of clerk permissions and user roles. So just a reminder here that if you need to create a new transaction code or create a new tax, anything like that that we saw in today's demonstration, you will need to have owner, administrator, user role, and you will need to have these 5 codes attached, or sorry, 5 permissions attached to your clerk ID. So to summarize our presentation for today, RoomKeyPMS Transaction Codes module offers a simple way to track your revenue through a variety of customizable codes and accounts. I'm going to open up the floor now to see if we have any questions about the topics we've looked at today. Just going to take a look at the Q&A section as well. Oh, so it looks like we have no open questions at this time. In that case, I am going to go ahead and close down our presentation a little bit early. Thank you everyone for joining in for today's presentation. I hope you have a wonderful week.